So Sunday we talked a little bit about courtship, dating, romance, falling in love, and so we're going to continue that theme, but what I wanted to do is do a little deeper dive of why. Like, have you ever thought about why people fall in love? Like the biology, the hormones, the chemicals. So I did a little research, and I'm going to mispronounce a lot of these chemicals because I'm not a scientist or someone who gives out these drugs. But basically, whenever someone is attracted to someone else and there's a connection and they're like, wow, in a woman's case, I'm in love with this man. In a guy's case, I'm in love with this woman. What's fascinating is all these hormones are released in your body. One is called cortisol. Some of you have heard of that. That's the stress hormone. So that's why when you have these feelings of being in love, you feel this sense of stress and anxiety, and you're like, where is this coming from? So that's cortisol. That's kind of the uncertainty of love. And there's this other hormone that is released through your body that basically it makes you have this sense of euphoria. It's like you're walking on cloud nine. It's like you're just in a daze, this euphoria. And this particular hormone, it begins to die down between years 4 and 5. So it's fascinating that one research report came back studying this phenomenon, and they said there's a high divorce rate at between 4 and 5 years of marriage. And big part of this is this hormone, that's this euphoric feeling, begins to level out. So there are some people that are junkies of this chemical where they're attracted to someone. And so those are like the attraction hormones. And then there's other hormones that are more long-term. You guys may have heard of oxytocin. How many of you heard of oxytocin? This hormone is, you see it through life. So when a mom nurses a child, oxytocin's released. It produces this bonding. So what's fascinating in love is that oxytocin is that connection where you feel bonded with someone. So what I'm describing is kind of the science behind the phenomenon of being in love. So to simplify it, for those of us who are non-pharmacy, non-science majors, myself included, is that there are certain hormones that attract you to somebody, and there's other hormones that attach you. So there's attraction and attachment. And so what happens is if people aren't careful, they're led by their emotion, their hormones, their feelings, and then so if you're all about the attraction hormone, you don't realize it, you become a junkie, you can go from relationship to relationship to relationship simply because that's going to ebb and flow. But if you hang in there, over time, that attachment is stronger than the attraction. And that's where the oxytocin and those other hormones kick in. So when we look at chapter 2, what we're going to just kind of do a brief review is that we're going to see that this couple, they're in this courtship. And one thing about Song of Solomon that's a little difficult is it's not linear. So there'll be certain times they're like, all right, they're dating, and other times it's a flashback or flash forward. So the Hebrew mind, it was more circular, the chronology. But for American mind, we're used to linear. So sometimes the maiden will have this daydream. She flashes back to their wedding. And then all of a sudden, we see chapter 4, they're in the honeymoon, and then later on in the book, she remembers her childhood, so her mind's going. But isn't that fascinating for the ladies out there that sometimes your mind does that? You go back and forth, and sometimes for us guys, it's like, all right, where are we at? Are we here? It's like trying to follow that. So a little brief review from Sunday, and then we're going to do a deeper dive into the verses we didn't cover, but we talked about 4 aspects of a Christ-centered relationship. Like what, if you're single, if you're married, what does it look like for a relationship to be Christ-centered? The first point was this: a Christ-centered relationship makes you feel better, not bitter. In verses 1 through 2, we saw the Shulamite woman. She's like, she begins to change. In chapter 1, she felt really low self-esteem. She's like, I'm sunburned. Don't judge me because I have a farmer's tan. I've been out in the vineyard. And all of a sudden, she's like, I'm a lily. I'm like this wild meadow flower. So her self-opinion's improving because of Solomon. He's making her feel better about herself. The second truth is a Christ-centered relationship enlivens your entire being. And we're going to go more into depth, verses 8 through 13. But verses 3 through 5, I love how she says, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. So like she's having this daydream, and she's like, you are life to my forest. You're like this apple tree. And she's like, I love the taste of your fruit. Like, you're attractive to me. And we really hit verses 4 and 5 that the banquet hall, it literally means like the place of wine. So it's kind of like this most likely an outdoor vineyard. So she's saying that, you've gone public in our relationship. And when I'm with you, when I think about your love, if I have to describe it in one word, your banner over me is love. And we talked about a banner was what military troops used to wave their flag. It meant I'm on this side, I'm on this side. It was public. You knew whose side you were on. So the Shulamite woman says, when I think about Solomon, he's not private about this. He's gone public. So one of the insights we had for people who are single is that dating should be more public than private. And I draw that application from they're out in public places, your banqueting hall, your banner over me. Because what happens before you get married is the temptation to go all the way is really high. And that's not going to happen in public. I mean, there's exceptions. We live in Asheville, right? But generally, that's not going to happen in public. It happens in private. So my advice to any couple is that, yeah, you need some alone time, but not too much. Because intimacy happens in private. So the more you are in private, the higher the temptation will be. The third truth we talked about from Sunday is a Christ-centered relationship reserves sexual intimacy for marriage. And it's basically, to do a little deeper understanding of that is like God custom and designed sex as a gift. It's a gift for a man and woman in marriage. And what happens with intimacy, it's like whenever you unite with someone else, obviously God can forgive it. He can forgive anything that we do that's not according to his will if we ask him. But the way he designed it, I'll never forget. I used to be a youth pastor. Some of you don't know that, but in my teens and early 20s, I was a youth pastor. And I read this youth ministry book that the point always stuck with me. It was about sexual purity in teenagers. And the exact paragraph said, did you know that God made you to be sexually with only one other person for the rest of your life? And I'm like, oh, really? I'm a youth pastor, I'm thinking about this, but like how your body is custom designed. And even without going into too much detail, like when a lady's a virgin and guy, they come together, there's often blood, and it's kind of like a lot of scholars that like that's like a blood covenant. It's like it's something sacred and special. And that's not to produce guilt for those who haven't done it that way, but it's like going forward is like, if I know that's God's intention, then why? And so we talked about, it's kind of like intimacy. I want you to think about like a piece of duct tape and a tissue paper. If you stick it together and you try to pull it apart, it's going to tear the piece of tissue paper apart. And that's kind of like your soul. It's, part of you is so fragile. And every time you get attached to someone and you break up, it's like ripping a piece of you out. So that's why it's not to say that God can't forgive anything, or if we've messed up, there's not forgiveness and there's grace. There is, but it's like we have to tell people going forward, like this is God's best for you. And there's something in science called the law of diminishing return. How many of you have heard of that law? And it's like the law of diminishing return is like to get the same effect, you have to keep doing more and more, and it's lesser effects. So I'll use kind of a negative illustration from the world. It's like someone that takes drugs. In order to get the same high, you have to take a higher dosage, more frequent, and that's called the law of diminishing return. So in relationships, if you are sexually intimate with a lot of people, it's challenged to get that intimacy that you truly desire, because what happens, that law of diminishing return, it's like you don't feel satisfied. And so it's kind of like, it goes without thinking, people will push back and say, what if I don't enjoy the sex? What if, whatever? Well, think about the logic. If you've only been with one person, that will be the best sex you've ever had. Just use the logic. I mean, if you've saved yourself, that's the best sex you've ever had because it's all you've ever known. So So the more people you're with, the chances are it's going to be that temptation because, God can forgive, but here's the temptation of the enemy. How many of you know, not just with sexuality, but the enemy throws things of your past back in your memory and you kick it out, but you don't want that in your sex life. You don't want that tape. And so I think with teenagers and young adults, singles, it's like we got to have a gospel of grace that God does forgive and he does give many chances. However, it's like he made you because he wants you to experience maximum intimacy, satisfaction in all your relationships. And if you do it your way, yeah, you're going to have a little pleasure, but it's going to be like part of your soul is going to be ripped out if that person doesn't become your spouse. And so it's like there's grace, there's forgiveness, but there's a better way. There's a better way. And so I look back at dating, and we got a lot of married people, some dating age. It's like if I had my time to do over, I would have dated a lot fewer people. I would have just been more picky. I would have been more involved with groups. And people push back and say, well, when you date, you get to know what you like and don't like. And I would push back and say, well, you can also experience that in friendships. If I'm friends with someone, I can tell whether they have good qualities or not. I don't have to date them to find that out. So I'm not anti-dating, but I'm anti-giving all of yourself to so many people before you get married. It becomes hard. So we kind of talked about that, like God's intention. And then the fourth aspect is a Christ-centered relationship practices healthy conflict resolution. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight, but the foxes, how do we get the foxes out of the vineyard? And so how many of you had discussions about that at home, about the foxes? What are the foxes in your vineyard? What are the miscommunications? And I'll be honest, I'll tell you one of mine is that whenever Lori gets upset at me, maybe I did something that offended her, I will automatically go into defense mode. Any other guys that, like, why are you mad at me? And then I'll begin to get upset that she's upset. And because I'm upset that she's upset, it escalates it, right? And so I haven't learned this lesson in 14 years, but I'm beginning to think, okay, Timothy, insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expect different results. After 14 years, I should know better that if I got her upset, me getting upset and defending myself, it just adds, fuel to the fire. Some of the guys are shaking their head, yes. So here's the thing. Maybe we can work together, hold each other accountable. What about just being quiet and being humble? Would that work? What about not defending yourself, giving them the right to be human, giving them the right to be upset at you? Because think about it logically. If I get upset because you're upset at me, that's me thinking that I have no flaws for which you to get upset about. Does that make sense? Like the humble route would be, you know what? You may be right. I may have done something really bad to justify this, but your emotions are your emotions. Did you know that you're not responsible for someone else's emotions? Only your response. You're responsible for how you carry yourself and you don't want to, but you can't control someone else's emotions. Now, you can provoke people, that's true, but you're not responsible for anyone's emotions but your own. So I say that to say that don't get caught up into someone else's emotions. Their emotions are their emotions. Now, don't provoke them, don't add fuel to it, but know that you're responsible for your own reactions. So let's do a deeper dive into verses. We covered verses 3 through 5. And so what I want to do is kind of go a little deeper in verses, we're going to be 6 and following. So when I look at this passage and when I see like her so excited about this guy and, her so intoxicated, it brings up a question. How should a woman feel about her man? And I think reading this scripture, it kind of gives us an insight into her soul. Like when a woman is spending time with someone, when she feels like he cares about her. I just want to give you a few highlights. Number one, she feels longing to spend time with her beloved. Look at verse 8. It says, "Listen, my beloved, look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills." So you're like, what is this talking about? She's thinking about Solomon. And she's kind of having this daydream like him coming. She's at her house in the country. Kind of to paint the picture, she's a country girl. He's a city boy, right? He lives in Jerusalem. She's out in the country somewhere. And so she's visualizing him coming. But notice how he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. She's like, I want him to not walk slowly. I want him to leap and bound. I want him to come quickly. You've heard the saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So she's like, I'm missing him. At this point, they're still in their courtship. They're not married yet. So she's like, I want to spend time with him. The second thing we see, how she feels about her man, is that she really sees him as a stud who's full of life. Now, we laugh when we say that, but look at verse 9. It says, my beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. You may want to write in your notes, stag, i.e. modern-day American stud. Like he is a man's man. Like when I think about him, you think about a gazelle, a stag, and that Israel culture, those were symbols of life. Those were symbols of youthfulness. In a lot of cases, sexuality. And she says, look, there he stands behind her wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. So she sees him coming to her, and all of a sudden he's looking through the window. Now, this is not some creepy peeping Tom, because they have a relationship. She's like, I want him to come. And the idea is like he's not just knocking on the door, he's seeing which room she's in. He's a romantic guy. He's not just bounding in. So there's a little side note for men. And I say this with a smirk because my mind goes back to when I was 18. I was a student at Fruitland Bible College here in Hendersonville. And the professor said something that really got me upset, really got me ticked off. And that I don't get upset very easily. But he looked at, they're all men in the room, and he said, you guys want to marry a supermodel wife, but have you looked in the mirror lately? And I was upset. I'm just like, excuse me? And he's like, and he was explaining, he's like, you want to marry a beautiful, godly girl. She has the looks of you name whoever, and she has the morals of Mother Teresa. You want all this, but have you looked in the mirror lately? And I don't know what he was trying to incite in us, but he basically, his principle is you attract what you are. So if what you want you're not, you have to become like that because like attracts like. I know there's some exceptions to that rule. Thank God for that. But the reason why I got upset with him, like some of you are probably thinking now, what about God? God answers prayers. What about? But I began to say, all right, the professor may be right, okay? I may be wrong. I may be this 18 cocky whippersnapper pastor, and I was at the time. I didn't realize I was. But in this case, I followed my elder's advice. So me then, and Brian, you knew me then, I was skinny as a beanpole, nothing like stud, stag. You wouldn't think of those terms. I mean, very thin, 130 pounds soaking wet. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, okay? But the type of woman I wanted, I wasn't attracting. I'm just being honest with you. So what I did is like, all right, I'm going to see what I can do. So I began to learn a lot of things I didn't know anything about. So, and this is self-deprecating, but I didn't know how to dress. No one ever taught me how to wear clothes right. I just, typical guy, T-shirt. But that wasn't attracting the type of girl I want. I wanted more of a girly girl, that type. I wasn't attracting. So I got a job at Banana Republic, not because I liked the store, but it was a job, and I learned how to dress, how men, women, how to match, and I worked with a lot of women, so I learned what they like in a guy. So I began to change the way I dress. So I joined the local gym. They actually had the Lord's Gym back in the day. I think I got a free membership because I was a pastor, but I started working out at the gym. I started taking protein, and I started putting on a little bit of muscle. And so what happened is that the professor was right. Girls that I never had a chance with, they were starting to feel, I had a chance with them now. And I'm like, thank God I listened to the professor, because my point is that if you're a single guy, there's nothing ungodly about trying to look your best, getting in shape, so that future person thinks of you like a stag. Think of you, and it's never too late to change that for those of us who are married. And it's kind of like, your spouse loves you for who you are. It's true, but there's nothing wrong with presenting your best for your spouse. And all the ladies said, amen, right? So I'm giving some practical application. She sees him as this stag. But here's the other one. This is the pushback that's true too, is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you are going to be a stag to somebody no matter what. So that's the encouraging point, okay? But for single guys, it's not bad to join a gym, to, present your best self. Nothing wrong with that. All right. So it brings us to our third aspect of today's point, is that, by the way, if you missed point one, is you can feel fully alive like you're walking on clouds of bliss. That was the first point. And I've entitled this, I forgot to give you the title, it's when a man loves the woman and when a woman loves a man. So number one, you feel fully alive. You're walking on these clouds of bliss, this serotonin, this dopamine. All this is going through your body, your brain. You're excited. Number two is a question, how should a woman feel about her man? She wants to be with him. She sees him as this stud who's full of life. And that brings us to the third point, which is a question. And the ladies are going to love this point. And keep in mind, Song of Solomon, it's the woman talking most of the time. So you probably feel like I'm beating up on the guys, but it's a lot of practical application for guys. There will be for women as well. But the question is, how can a husband capture his wife's heart? And if you're dating, it's like, how can you capture a young lady's heart? A lot of these are applicable. So number one is to learn how to speak to your wife's heart if you want to continue to capture her heart. So it's the art of speaking to the heart. So look at there in verse 10. We're in Song of Solomon 2, verse 10. My beloved spoke to me and said, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. So ladies, how do you feel if your man speaks to you in terms of endearment? I mean, look, darling, beautiful one. We're going to see him call her dove. And it's like, those are terms of affection. And it's like when you're dating, you use those terms. If you notice after you get married, it's like, hey, come over here. Some of you, maybe bad woman, get over here. It's like, what happened, right? We laugh, but it's true. But here's the thing. What you use to capture her heart, you have to continue to do to keep her heart. So another thing about Song of Solomon, I was telling my wife, I don't know about you guys, this is helping my marriage. Because as I research this, I'm like, man, I need to talk to my wife better. I need to offer more compliments. Man, I need to, as I see her, the kids are, I need to pop a kiss on her like I did when we were dating in front of the kids. And women know when you're like excited and passionate, they're taking note. Number two is take the lead in planning fun experiences for your wife. So how many of you ladies like doing all the planning for all the trips? There are a few, right? How many of you wish the guy would just do it? The majority, right? There's always exceptions to the rule. But have you ever noticed that in dating, a lot of times the guy would plan the date, we're going to go here, there. But after you get married, it's like, I don't know, you decide. Where do you want to go to eat? I don't care. And guys, I don't want to be stereotypical, I'm just telling you the general rule is most ladies, and I'm guilty of this, most ladies would like for you to, number one, get to know what they like, but then make a decision. They sometimes want to be on coast mode. They've been watching the kids. They've been doing a job sometimes at the house. Picking a restaurant, you should already know what they like, right? You should already research. No, you've been with that woman for a while. Pick something you know they like. Maybe try something new. So look at the verse here. I love how verse 11, this is Solomon talking. See, the winter is past. The rains are over and gone. So he's realizing, all right, he's getting ready to come up with the trip plan. So he's like, listen, it's springtime. And how ironic it's springtime right now. Wintertime, you feel a little secluded, sequestered. But baby, it's springtime. Springtime is life is happening. The grass is green again. The sun is warm again. I got a trip planned. So all of a sudden she's hearing this. The third aspect of what a man needs to do to capture his wife's heart is seize the beauty of each season. So look in verse 12. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in her land. And you're like, what is he talking about? Solomon realizes it's the right season. So I think in relationships, what's going to make a marriage exciting, and this is something a lot of us can work on, is that what's the beauty in each season? When it's wintertime, what are things you can do that's going to excite your wife and your kids, if you have kids? I mean, what Christmas traditions, what winter traditions? Is it going skiing? Is it going on a trip? All right, so winter's past. What about springtime? What do you like to do for spring? Is it going to the beach? Is it going... Because what happens if you're in the day-to-day monotony, many of you have jobs, sometimes both of you as spouses work, it's like you get in the monotony of the day-to-day, but if you have something to look forward to, imagine we got this coming, and then summertime's coming. And so I would just encourage you, this is part of being a leader as a husband, is create experiences for your wife and family that they look forward to. And I'm convicted as I do this because, and the more kids you have, the more expensive it is. And you're like, we can't afford to do something every season. I mean, 1 week a year is all we can afford, but there's creative things. Like 2 weeks ago when I was on baby leave, my job was to take all 5 kids so Lori could watch the one, and basically it was to keep them entertained. So I did stuff I haven't done in years, like going down sliding rock when it's ice cold and, so invigorating. They say ice baths are really, how many of you done an ice bath before? I had never, but it does something to your brain. You're like, wow, I mean, invigorate, you wake up. We went on a trail hike. We went to Cherokee. How many of you have been in Cherokee recently? I haven't been in years. So I'm like, Cherokee is cool, So it's like, and what happens just on the love aspect, one of the research found that the feelings of love don't last very long. On average, they only last up to about 18 months. So they said one of the things that can trigger those in-love hormones is new experiences. Try something new, do something different. Sometimes it's good to try a new restaurant instead of going to the same restaurant. Sometimes it's good to go to a new vacation spot instead of the same one. So just mix it up. So seize the beauty of each season. Number 4 is recapture the romance you had while you were still dating. So in verse 13, it says, the fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. So what does this talk about? Fig trees, blossoming vines, fragrance. It's Solomon being romantic. And it's been said that the most romantic a guy will be is when he's dating. After they get married, it goes downhill from there. Is that true? That's what the majority of women say, right? The most romantic a man will ever be is when he's dating, after he says, I do. But here's the thing. What captured your wife's heart when you're dating? What if you did those things again? For me, I became like a poet. I would write my bride-to-be all these letters. When's the last time I've wrote a letter to her? I mean, it's been a while, right? Maybe on Mother's Day last year. It's bad. I remember one of the times, but part of my excuse is a lame excuse, but I was so in love that it wasn't even work. It just flowed, wrote it down. One of the stories I've never shared before in church is that when I was going to ask her to be my girlfriend in a steady courtship, I wrote her a 3-part play that I read out to her at the Grove Park Inn. We were just kind of hanging out by the fireplace, and I read it out to her, and I wish I had it to this day because I spent time writing it. But when's the last time I wrote her even a 1-page liner, much less a 3-part play? So it's and I know we have constraints. I know we have jobs and time and kids. But what if you did a fraction of what you used to do? What if you showed an effort? And sometimes with their wives, it's a little like a note on the mirror. Or they get in the car and, the visor pulls down and you got a little sticky note. Little things. Small tweaks can take you to giant peaks. I mean, just little things. It doesn't have to be a 3-part play, but maybe a little sticky note. Number 5, lead her with gentleness and grace, never with force. I love verse 14, and kind of verse 14 to frame it. It's like the Shulamite woman feels uncertain about Solomon. Do I really want to be the queen of Israel? I mean, he's going to be the king over all the 12 tribes. Do I really want to be, do I really want to be his woman? I mean, I'm going to have to share him. He's going to have to go to all these meetings. I'm going to be alone in the palace. So notice how he speaks to her. He says, my dove in the cleft of the rocks, in the hiding places of the mountain, show me your face. I love how he speaks to her. Listen, show me your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is lovely. He doesn't say, woman, get out here. Come on out. Stop hiding. He says, my dove. He's like, you're so gentle. You're so innocent. It's like a little dove hiding out in this rock, this cave. And he said, come out. I want to see your face. I want to hear your voice. So something that men sometimes are bad at, you may be the exception for the man in the room, but a lot of men, is that it's easy to lead sometimes with dominance. Sometimes it's hard to lead with grace and gentleness. And so it's like women often want to be led just with graciousness, gentleness, not with force. So most of us have that when we're dating, but after you get married, hey, what's for breakfast? Hey, and we start grunting and giving stuff. And we didn't do that when we were dating, right? Why? Because we didn't want to lose her. We didn't want her to what am I getting myself into? So recapture leadership with gentleness and grace. And, some practical points of that is, men, just be careful about raising your voice because women are often more sensitive. Now, there's exceptions to the rule, but generally most women do not want their husband to raise their voice. Just speak with softness. And I know as I'm saying this, I'm convicted as well many of you are. Lord, help us and forgive us. Number 6, we covered this on Sunday, but I just want to revisit it. Work through your problems as they arise so they don't grow over time. So verse 15, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. So I got these foxes over here. Good commercial break. So you think about foxes in a vineyard. Not only do they eat the fruit, but they also dig up the roots. So it's kind of like foxes, if they're left unrestrained, the fruit can grow back, but once the root is dug up, that's pretty bad damage to that particular plant or that vine. So he's like, listen, capture these foxes. Don't let these foxes grow. And by the way, we don't know who spoke this. Some Bibles will say it was the man, the woman. Some translations will use the brothers. We truly don't know. The headings weren't in the original Hebrew, just so you know. So that's why different translations will say Solomon, the woman, the brothers. We don't know who spoke it. But regardless of who spoke it, it's the principle that a fox is anything that causes damage in your relationship. And you think about a fox, it's sneaky. Foxes come out when you least expect them. They're usually at nighttime when you think, oh, there's a fox. I mean, you might see a fox broad daylight, but they're kind of sneaky. And Sunday we hit 5 foxes, just briefly review them. We had the red fox of poor communication. So the idea behind that is learn how to communicate. Like, if you can't communicate well, then it's going to create a lot of fights, a lot of friction. And so one of the things we mentioned is starting with this phrase, both husband and wife, tell me what you mean from your perspective. And just say it gently, not defensively, but can you tell me from your perspective? And it goes back to the old Covey principle that how to win friends and influence people. Most of you have read the book or heard of it. Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Same principle. Number 2, the silver fox of distrust. Like, it's hard in a marriage that if someone's done something to take the trust. And that happens. It does. And, we've counseled couples where there's been affairs and different things that has taken place. And it's not that you don't forgive and work through it, but the point is trust is going to take time to rebuild. It does. It doesn't come back overnight. And thankfully, there's been a lot of marriages that have been salvaged. I can't remember what the average statistic is, but it's like 40, 50% of people have experienced affairs. I mean, it's a high percentage. So in our case, we encourage couples, Christian couples that experience that, let's deal with what happened, let's work through it, let's forgive, but let's rebuild the trust. And that's important. The crosswalks of misunderstandings, just simply being male and female, and the differences there create a whole list of misunderstandings, you know. He said, she said, well, I didn't really mean it that way. Well, it came across that way. And sometimes both of you can be right. It's just you're coming at different angles of things. So try to work through that. Sunday, I gave you a line that you can use. You may be right. It works really well. We talked about the Arctic fox of emotional drain. Please don't do passive-aggressive behavior. Couples have done this. Like sometimes if a wife is upset, she'll freeze out the husband and be like, I'm not going to be intimate with you until you get this right. And it's like, you can't use sex as a weapon against somebody. It's a gift. So never use that. Or the man will be like, all right, I'm going to go off extra this weekend. And it's like intentionally staying away. So it's like both couples can have passive-aggressive behavior, but all that is a fox. It's causing destruction. And then the dark fox of secrecy, that's similar about trust, that, you know, there are certain things that are confidential that wouldn't help you to tell your spouse. I mentioned that, like if you're a counselor, you may not want to tell all the horror stories. You know, there are certain things that are confidential, but as far as secrets, I would just be careful, you know, and one of the things I've noticed as a minister is just one of the dangers is social media. Like what will happen with people is an old ex will try to add so-and-so on your friends list, and it's like, is that the guy you dated or the girl you dated? Why do you need to be friends with them on social media? You know, little things, and they add them, and then all of a sudden there's a DM, and it's like starts off small, and you just gotta be aware of that because that can be an issue. So before we get practical on this, do we have any questions? I want to pause and give you guys some questions. I want to give a list. This is on your listening guide for practical tips for husbands because it's easy to say, yeah, be adventurous, be planning, be romantic, but sometimes as guys, we need like a cheat sheet. Okay, how? You know, give me some tips. Any questions on what we've covered so far? All right, we'll continue on. So if you look on your listening guide, 10 suggestions for men planning meaningful trips. I did some research online using different resources and came up with this list, and all of them may seem over the top, but maybe one would work, okay? Some of you are like, I can't afford that, but the first one is a personalized getaway. So think about your wife's interests. You know, she may like the mountains, she may like the beach, and it doesn't have to be expensive, but like you already know what she likes. So why don't you plan a tour and just say, hey, I need you to clear your calendar. I'm not going to tell you where we're going, but here's what you need to bring to wear. And just plan a getaway. I mean, that's kind of cool. That's kind of the second one follows that, a surprise adventure. You know, what about something that's different, like hot air balloon ride, horseback riding, cooking class? Now, for some women, you may not like that, but if you're a wife and you like cooking and your husband does not and he does it with you, talk about getting equity in the emotional bank account. I don't like cooking, but I'm going to go to the cooking class with you. Or some of you guys may not like art. I'll go to the art painting class. I'll learn how to do a quick draw. I mean, that's, especially if you don't like it and they do, that's huge. Romantic retreat. You know, the thing with Airbnb, that's so easy to do these days. You can get a night or two. Sometimes a cabin is $40, $50. Sometimes if you know somebody, it's free, you know. So it's a little getaway, cozy cabin. Sounds good. Cultural immersion. So what about something that you've never tried before? What about doing something that's totally different? And it doesn't have to be away. It could be like, all right, we're going to go to an Indian restaurant. We're going to try to eat something spicy. I don't like spicy. Let's just try it, you know. All right, we're going to eat vegan this week. Well, I like meat. Let's try it. We never know. Like, try something different. You can also go to, like, cultural festivals. Something in Asheville they have. How many of you have been to Restaurant Week? Anybody done that? Oh, that's great. It's like the cheapest restaurants. Like, expensive restaurants you can't afford now. It's cheap. They do it. Does somebody remember? It's like February. Is it February or March? Yeah, Restaurant Week Asheville. It's great, man. It's get all this food reasonable, and it's even cheaper at lunchtime than dinner. So, big thing. Wellness retreat. So, how many of you ladies like spas? Get a mani pedicure. Amber got a place there just down the road. What's the name of your spa? Spa at Mills River. So there we go. We got a church member already, the connection. Spa at Mills River. So, it's amazing. And us guys, I can't speak for all guys, but for me, I understand my wife likes that stuff. I don't understand it, I'd feel weird getting maybe it's relaxing, but I'm sure men do, but that's what she likes. So it's not, I don't like it. Well, it doesn't matter what you like. It's what she likes, all right? So a wellness retreat would also be that there's Christian retreats. And a good resource that we often don't talk about due to time is you got the Billy Graham Training Center down the road. And it's often free. Free or like $25, like for natives, like local, you can often go to a lot of these places for free or very little. So look at their calendar. There's a lot of stuff you can check out. Great speakers like a Chip Ingram, or you got Jim Cymbala, Brooklyn Tabernacle. There's all these great speakers that come pretty much a couple times a month. Adventure travel. That's something I haven't done a lot, but some of you have gone to national parks. Isn't it like free or more affordable at national parks? Like people do that, very affordable. Safari, hey, that would be nice. But, adventure travel could be just going on the Blue Ridge Parkway, try and go on a trail. Doesn't have to be expensive. So, local food tour. So, think about different food options. Like, example, in Hendersonville, how many good downtown options do you have in Hendersonville? I mean, there's so many restaurants. You go to Fletcher, you got the Fletcher Bakery. I mean, everywhere you go, it's like there's a lot of cool things you can do. All right, number 8, making memory experiences like that are unique and memorable. So we mentioned hot air balloon. Something that's easy to do is getting up, looking at a sunrise. How many of you do that? Sunrise, sunset, get a cup of coffee. It's free. You get out your front porch and creating an experience. Nature retreats, we talked about that. There's a lot of trails, river hiking, botanical gardens. Got the Arboretum down the road. And then finally, number 10 that all of us can do is just spending quality time together. That we make time for our work, we make time for sleep. But you know what? You got to make time for each other. And the way I view it, just to summarize this in very simple terms that you guys have heard before, it's like a bank account. It's an emotional, romantic bank account. And whenever you put deposits in, it's like you feel it come back. Like you don't do it to get back, but it's like Paul said, when you love your wife, it's like you're loving yourself. You're one flesh. So it's like you can't like give in such a way that you're thinking, man, this is pointless. No, you're loving your spouse. It's important. So I want to kind of skip to the end because we're running short on time. Let's throw the big idea on the screen. A Christ-centered relationship, this kind of summarizes all of chapter 2, will build you up, draw you closer to God, and leave you better than before. So what I want to see as summary of chapter 2 as we finished it is that, they're having this courtship, and there's a lot of life going on, and there's excitement. And something I did not mention, I skipped 2 points. So let's go back. These are the verses I skipped. I was going to talk about translation. How does a woman respond to a man who truly captures her heart with grace? We didn't cover verses 16 and 17. Can't let me skip over these hard verses, okay? So number 1, she feels cherished, love, and a sense of belonging. Notice verse 16. My beloved is mine and I am his. He browses among the lilies. Like, what's going on here? So at the end of chapter 2, the Shulamite woman says, I am my beloved and he is mine. When a woman feels loved, she senses like, I belong to this man. And so this whole browsing among the lilies, there's different ways of interpreting that. It could be, a sensual thing, but it could be simply like he was a shepherd and he's a hard worker. So there are different ways. Now, verse 17 is the hard one. So let me give you the point and then we'll talk about it. A woman who feels love wants to show her man how much she loves him. So verse 17, this is where a Hebrew word, if you interpret it different ways, Sunday I gave you one way of interpreting, I'll give you another one today, but it says, until the day breaks and the shadows flee, turn my beloved and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the rugged hills. So here's two ways of translating it. And Brent, this is where it gets hard here, okay? So the word turn, it can mean turn from me and run away, or it can mean turn towards me, okay? Let me tell you the difference in interpretation. So Sunday I mentioned they're dating. So her response could be, hey, it's getting too intimate. I want to be with you. You know, we've said, do not arouse, awaken love. We talked about the foxes. So that they know the right timing. So if it means turn away, it means like, hey, head for the hills, right? Going back to Israel. I can't handle this. But as I did more research on this, most scholars think the word turn means turn towards me. So you're like, this is dangerous because they're not married yet. So let me explain. This is her desire. She wants to be one with her man, but she doesn't do it until chapter 4. So this is like, so it goes back to what I said on Sunday. Sexual desires are good and normal. You just don't act upon them until the right time. So you asked Timothy, what does it mean if it's turned towards me? And let's look at the words here. Be like a gazelle, young stag. I mentioned those are words that are like masculinity, sexuality. What are the rugged hills? Some of you have the translation on the hills of Bether. How many of you had that in your translation? The hills of Bether. This is the NIV translate. Okay. So what's interesting is scholars, like, they haven't found any hills of Bether. So they're like, what is, they don't really know what it means, okay? So if this means turn towards me and come on the hills of Bether, this most likely is referring to her breast. The two breasts. I want you to come and basically let's do it. The hills of Bether, okay? So you're like, wow, that's kind of dangerous. They're not married. Yes, but keep in mind, he doesn't until the right time. And that's with chapter 4. So when you read that, I'm showing you how one word changes the meaning. If it turned from me, it means get out of here like a stag, run away, I can't handle this. Or it means, come on, I love you so much, I can't wait to be your bride, let's consummate this thing and move forward. So that's where you're going to see in chapter 3, this is a preview for Sunday, it's going to set up, she's going to continue to have these dreams about him, and then in chapter 3, we're going to see the wedding procession. And then chapter 4, which is going to be next Wednesday night. You can't miss next Wednesday night. It's the honeymoon. And you've never seen me blush like this, but it's going to be one of those chapters. I'm not doing it on Sunday morning because it's pretty graphic. So hopefully you see that the Song of Solomon is one of those rare books that it's holy and sacred, and yet it's full of passion. So like you look at Hollywood, and there's a lot of passion there, but there's no holiness there. And you look at some churches there, and it's sacred, but there's no passion or sizzle. Like, what in the world? And I think if you take the Bible for what it is, you see that God is holy, and yet he made you with this great gift called sexuality. And it's meant for the context of marriage, and it's a gift. And what's fascinating that's mesmerized me is that usually when you're talking about sex or sexuality, usually you're hearing a guy talk. Song of Solomon, it gets in the woman's mind, how she's feeling and what she's thinking. And for us guys, it's like, I didn't know women even think about that, right? So it's interesting to say the least. So we got some small group questions. So we're going to break up in men and women. So men will go over here, women on the opposite side. And these are questions that you may not fit this category. But if you're single, I want you guys to kind of discuss, we'll have married men in the group, married women, like, what are some steps to keep the relationship pure? Like, how do I do it? For those of you who messed up and, didn't, maybe you give tips on, hey, if I had to go back, here's what I would do. Everything's in grace. For married couples, how do you prioritize investing time? Like, you guys are busy. Some of you work 50, 60 hours a week. Some of you have kids. Some of you have grandkids. How do you prioritize each other? Because here's something we didn't talk about, but it needs to be said that your marriage is not based upon your kids. And one of the reasons why some marriages end in divorce is when the kids grow up and leave the house, there's no marriage because it was a child-based marriage. Biblically, it's obviously Christ at the center, but then it's your spouse. Spouse always comes before the kids because the kids go, but the spouse stays. But how many Americans do you know that their whole marriage is around the kids? And guess what? When that kid moves out, what happened to me and you? Well, it was all about the kids. So it's God first, then your spouse, then your kids, then your job. But sometimes in American culture, it's like job, kids, spouse, and you wonder why so many marriages are struggling. All right, for dating couples, how can you support each other maintaining purity? What are some tips? I gave one on Sunday. I had a 9 o'clock curfew. I'm not saying you have to have a 9 o'clock curfew, but for us, it's like, hey, I'm tempted. You need to leave, in a nice way. And, we both understood we're doing this for a reason, okay? So those are some questions. There's some more if you get to 4 and 5, but let's go ahead and have the men on the far left side, your right side, and ladies on your left, my right. And it's 7 o'clock, so after you're done, you can just dismiss yourselves. And if you guys have any questions, I will be around. Thank you.